You let me know. You want me to hit record or are you gonna just did it? So,
I always start recording.
okay.
So
Once I see the red button, I'll start.
okay. You can start right now. It's actually recording.
Okay, so it didn't show up on my end. Okay. Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining today's panel discussion on the importance of cannabis packaging and labeling. I would like to start by recognizing our event host, the Cannabis and Hemp Networking Association of New York, which is an organization committed to building a professional community where ideas and resources are openly exchanged among businesses in the legal cannabis, marijuana, and hemp industries. I'd also like to thank Tannenbaum, Halpern, Syracuse, and Hurstrit for helping put together today's program. So a few notes before we begin. Today's event will run for approximately 60 minutes. During the panel, all attendee mics will be muted. So if you have a question, please utilize the Q&A feature in Zoom. And after the panel discussion has concluded, we will be able to answer those during a live Q&A. Following the event, a recording link will be sent to anyone who's attended the live discussion. My name is Kelly Detweiler, and I am the managing partner of Titan Group, which is a risk management firm that is comprised of former DEA agents, diversion investigators, and regulatory experts who provide solutions for industries that work with controlled substances. And that includes cannabis. One of the things that we've found is that many of the problems cannabis companies are experiencing are stemming from some sort of a lack of compliance, whether at the federal, the state, or the local level. So what we do is we solve that. Our team helps connect all of those regulatory dots, and we provide a single source of expertise, but most importantly, peace of mind. So on that note, let's meet our panelists. Starting with Michael, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Kelly. I am Michael Schwab. I'm an attorney with Mort, Hawk & Hamrath, where I specialize in the protection and enforcement of intellectual properties, copyrights, and trademarks is primarily the area that I focus on. I also focus on advising clients in the cannabis, alcoholic beverage, food, and dietary supplement fields in complying with the regulations related to their products.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. Dan?
Hi, my name is Dan DiCapiti. I'm the President and Chief Creative Officer of Canna Supply House. I have 20 years experience in branding, marketing, product development. I'm a former online creative director at ESPN The Magazine and ESPN Insider, an owner and operator of Cody Studios, a design and development shop in Brooklyn, New York, specializing in branding apps and digital interfaces. A few years ago, I partnered with a business associate of mine who has been printing and manufacturing both stateside and overseas for 20 years. Together, we formed Canna Supply House, which provides branding and custom child-resistant packaging solutions to a wide range of clients, both large and small across the US. Our team designs, develops, and manufactures custom jars, boxes, tins, bags, and more while complying to various state rules and regulations on a daily basis.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. John?
Hey, Kelly, it's good to be here with the rest of the panelists. I'm John Shearman, Vice President of Marketing and Cannabis Lead for Applied DNA Sciences. We are a biotech company. We have a very unique platform we call CertainT, and it uses molecular technology to apply a unique identifier to the actual cannabis plant, to the oils, tinctures, and all the byproducts. And then also it can be used for labeling and packaging, of which the topic of today's discussion is all about. So it's good to be here with everyone.
It's great to have you. Thanks very much. And James?
Hi, Kelly. I'm pleased to be here as well with my fellow panelists, and also pleased to be a member of the Cannabis and Hemp Networking Association of New York. I'm James Rieger, a partner at Tannenbaum, Halpern, Syracuse, and Hurstrit, a law firm in New York. We form cannabis-related private investment funds, make their investments, work with MSOs, CBD companies, and other participants in the industry on the transactional, venture capital, regulatory, mergers and acquisitions side.
Wonderful. Thank you, James. And thank you all for volunteering your time today. So on that note, let's begin. As many of you know, 2020 saw cannabis very widely recognized throughout the United States as an essential business. And while it continues to flourish, it still remains a very highly regulated industry with multiple challenges from state and federal regulatory agencies. In addition, national branding has also become a challenge for cannabis due to the various legal constraints on intellectual property and advertising. So as we start this off, James, what are some of the common but key regulatory requirements that you're seeing from state to state And how do they differ?
That's a great question, Kelly. Before I go into that, I think it makes sense to take a minute or two to talk about how we got here. So in 2018, Congress passed the Farm Bill, as many of you know. It was spearheaded by a bunch of senators and congressmen from states that formerly grew tobacco and wanted to see hemp grown essentially for CBD to help replace those jobs and that economic impact in their states. What I think Congress failed to realize at the time was they didn't add sufficient direction to actually legalize CBD in products that people could actually use. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture was charged with coming up with the rules relating to the growing of hemp, and they've done so, and that's a 288-page document. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, however, is in charge of regulating food, drugs, cosmetics, dietary supplements, and medical devices. And 4 of those 5 things, all but medical devices, relate to cannabis, cannabinoids, and CBD in some aspects. The FDA has approved CBD as the active ingredient in 1 drug that passed rigorous clinical trials over 5 years, and hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on those trials, called Epidiolex, for childhood seizure disorder. Because that drug was approved before CBD was commonly used in the food supply in the United States, the FDA takes the technical view that CBD is not what's called GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. So even though you see CBD sold in gas stations and pharmacies and bodegas and delis and supermarkets all over the place, and of course on the internet, the FDA takes the position that all those sales of CBD related products are essentially illegal. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, in addition, relates to dietary supplements, states that only dietary supplements meeting the federal standard can use a supplement fax on its back panel. The FDA rules and related rules say that only drugs can make disease claims, and by drugs I mean things that have passed through clinical trials. Cosmetics as well, if they're topical, which they probably would be, and they're intended to treat or prevent disease or affect structure or function of human body, could not contain CBD. So people have been waiting on the FDA to do something to update their rules to take account for the fact that so much CBD is being sold everywhere. And there was a position called a paper called the Cannabis Enforcement Policy, which was submitted to the White House Office of Management and Budget last year. And strangely enough, or perhaps not strangely enough, none of the details of that cannabis enforcement policy were leaked. So no one knows what it says. As many things do when a new administration comes in, that policy was pulled by the FDA when the Biden administration came in, and no one's really sure whether that was pulled because the Biden administration would like a looser policy than what may have been in the cannabis enforcement policy. But right now we're left with the strange situation where there has been no federal rulemaking from the FDA on CBD. They have done a request for proposal for outside sources, outside companies to test well over 1,000 products for their purity, the amount of CBD in them, and that is an ongoing process. But what we're left with a number of states that have said, some states follow the FDA policy that essentially CBD can't be introduced into the food supply or used as a dietary supplement in their state. And there are a number of other states that are essentially trying to usurp the FDA's position by writing specific legislation that says that CBD can be used in those products. So when you go into packaging and labeling, you go back to about 2018 when Indiana, which is a very rigorous and harsh state in terms of enforcement of marijuana and cannabis violations themselves, decided to be a leader in the CBD packaging space. And they came out with the first requirement to put QR codes, those squiggly looking things that you take a picture of with your smartphone, that sends you to a website that then gives you a bunch of useful information, such as the batch date of the hemp that was grown, an identifier for that hemp, an expiration date for the product, where it was grown, what testing lab was used. A number of other states have followed that model and have written similar rules, and Utah, Louisiana, Texas followed that model. So some states have slightly different requirements. Utah, for instance, has different labels that they would be required for vape products versus ingestible products. We happen to be in New York. New York has a proposed set of pending rules, which are about 60 pages or more. And they are taking a pretty proactive approach to allowing CBD in dietary supplements and in food and beverages, assuming the rules actually get implemented. And strangely enough, although there continue to be called proposed rules that came out towards the end of 2020, New York is in fact accepting applications for retail licenses to sell CBD, and is accepting applications for permits for distributors of out-of-state grown hemp that would be sold in New York, but they are not yet accepting applications for processor applications. So New York essentially looks to some of the best practices from the federal rules, such as the FDA dietary supplement rules in terms of disclosure of what's on a package, and requires a facts panel. The facts panel contains things like number of ingredients in the product, the ingredients in the product, the number of servings, requires a warnings label, no smaller than 8-point font, which says things like keep out of reach of children, derived from hemp and may contain THC, not for use while pregnant, has not been evaluated by the FDA for safety or efficacy, if inhaled could be hazardous to health. And then New York, interestingly enough, has added another significant requirement to their packaging and labeling, that a food or beverage product cannot contain more than 25 milligrams of CBD in it, and a dietary supplement in a particular package cannot have more than 3,000 milligrams of CBD in it.
Excellent. Thank you. And it sounds like the whole world of regulatory is really based off of a direction of safety. So on that note, I'd love to hear from Dan. What are some of the general packaging guidelines for safety?
Sure. So all legal cannabis packaging needs to have a child-resistant, senior-friendly lock, whether it be a screw top, push button, flap, anything else we engineer. What this basically means is that testing and certification of child-resistant packaging falls under the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC. The main statute for this discussion is the PPPA, the Poison Prevention Packaging Act, which requires a number of household substances to be packaged in child-resistant packaging, making it extremely difficult for children under 5 to access contents. So often you'll hear CFR 1700.20 certified. That's the actual name of the testing procedure. While stipulations vary, the basic test consists of 50 children aged 3 to 4, various locations and demographics. These children are given an identical package and have 10 minutes to open it. While the technicalities can vary based on territory, generally if 80% cannot open that package at the end of the 10 minutes, that's considered a pass. Conversely, adult seniors are also given this package with the intent that they can open it to ensure it's senior friendly. Now, you want to ensure that your package has a certificate of compliance pertaining to CFR 1700 and officially qualifies as child resistant in your state. Now, the other thing that they added are labels. The actual requirements of what's displayed on these labels, and they can be done via QR codes or printed off the Zebra printer and applied, but the basic requirements vary. But it's a combination of warnings. Contains THC, not safe for children, government warnings, ingredients, additives, directions for use, portion recommendations, testing results for THC, CBD, and others. And that's basically the gist of it.
Excellent. And I'd be curious, John, what have you come into experience from a safety standpoint with your background?
Yeah, I'd like to add 3 things, and that's traceability, transparency, and trust. The first one is around traceability of source materials. So everything Dan was just talking about, you have to be able to prove all that. So you need to, have the certificate of analysis, which is the third-party lab, to make sure there's no contaminants within your products. Then that has to tie into your ERP systems to be able to track all that information. That leads to then seed to sale systems that pushes information from your, as a manufacturer, into the dispensary and back and forth. And then you have lab information systems that are involved also. So all these advanced technologies that are coming together allows you to have proof of that chain of custody. And then, so that leads me into transparency. So how transparent do you want as a brand to your consumer? And the best brands out there are very transparent. And by capturing all this information, all the legal, all the regulatories that James talked about and Dan, you got to be able to prove that at any given time. So that's through the QR codes, and also allows for dispensaries to tell a very rich story to the consumer coming in there and asking, hey, I'm here for the first time. I don't know a lot about this. If you could tell that chain of custody story, it gives them a sense of safety right there, that they know what they're talking about and they have facts to prove it up from a scientific standpoint. The third one is trust, and that's trust between the manufacturers, the brand, and the dispensary, and then ultimately that customer. So you got to link all those together. So those are a couple of points I'd just like to break out, Kelly.
I love the triple T. It's such a great way to break that down. And so clearly there's a lot going on here. Michael, how do all of these requirements affect branding and packaging decisions?
Well, they affected quite a bit. Branding, what you're going to name your product and your business, is one of the most important aspects of a business, because the consumers will come to understand your product, will look for your product. So in the cannabis world, we have some interesting challenges with protecting the brand name or protecting the trademark. So just to step back a little bit, a trademark is any word, name, or device which identifies and distinguishes a product or service. So it's basically an indication of source. So every time you go into a computer store, if you see the word Apple, you have an understanding of where that computer came from, who the source is. You may not know that Apple is based in California, but you have an expectation of that computer has come from the same company every time you buy it. And in order to protect a trademark, there's laws and regulations as to what can be done to protect it. For one, the word has to qualify as a trademark. So if you're thinking of branding, we generally recommend to clients that they steer away from descriptive terms or generic terms. So a generic term is a term that describes it itself. So in the cannabis field, cannabis, CBD, hemp are terms that are likely not going to be protectable as a trademark. And then we also do a search to see whether or not somebody else has a similar trademark, and whether if you start branding something, you're going to come into conflict and basically infringe somebody's rights. Now, in the United States, trademark rights are derived from use of the mark in commerce. So you actually don't need a trademark registration to have trademark rights. But what a federal trademark registration does provide you is with a basket of rights. It gives you certain rights that you don't have based upon your common law use. Access to federal court, nationwide rights, right to use the R in the circle. After 5 years, it can become incontestable. So there's a number of really strong reasons why you would want to federally register your trademark. In the cannabis and hemp field, we have an additional hurdle. As I said, trademark rights in the United States are based upon use of the mark in commerce. The trademark office has indicated that that use must be legal use. And because cannabis is not legal under federal law, it is not possible to obtain a registration for cannabis-related products. So what we've discussed with clients often is, well, wait a second, is it legal? Is your product a CBD product or a hemp product that's legal under the Farm Act? And if it is so, we can obtain a registration for that. Are you selling related goods? So if you sell chocolates and they're cannabis-infused chocolates, are you also selling regular chocolates? Can we get a registration for the regular chocolates? Do you have a website that educates consumers about cannabis? Maybe we get a registration for that website in order to protect it. And the other thing we often recommend clients is that many people don't know you can register your trademarks with states. The state registration only provides protection within the state you're operating in. But if you're a local business, and cannabis right now, because it's federal legal, is a local business, maybe get a registration in your state. You kind of put the stake in the ground, tell the world you claim trademark rights, and it'll help you protect it, hopefully, as we all hope in the future, when it becomes legal and we can get federal registration for cannabis products.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that insight, Michael. And James, with your background, what are some of the things that you see where requirements are affecting branding and packaging?
Yeah, as Michael said, it's very difficult, right? At the end of the day, hemp or CBD derived from hemp is a commodity product. you can argue a little bit differently with respect to regular marijuana, with respect to different strains and things like that. But you really need to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, and it's very hard to do with all the rigorous rules that go state by state, conflicting rules at the federal level. And it makes it very tough to do. So, an anecdote that I saw that it just shows you how hard this business can be from a marketing and advertising and branding perspective, is that cannabis related companies are 10 times as likely, or they spend 10 times as much as all other companies on outdoor advertising. Outdoor advertising is billboards. I mean, you think about, a concept that's 50 or 70 years old in terms of how you approach a market. So you think you get off the plane in Las Vegas and you see the big billboard for MedMen or Planet 13 or something like that. It's tough to do. So, really thinking outside the box and maybe in adopting some other consumer packaged goods things from their playbook. So for instance, a sustainable product. Your hemp was grown, using less water than other hemp was. It was processed in a factory that maybe uses solar energy rather than, off the grid, organic type certifications. It was grown in organic fashion. There are some actual industry related certifications that you can get now from groups such as the group that brought out ISO and things like that. There's a cannabis safety and quality certification you can get if you go through enough pain and effort to get that on your packaging. And then interestingly enough, is New York, as part of their proposed rules, has a concept called New York hemp, which is they're trying to, assuming that your hemp was fully grown in New York, complies with all the other state rules, it can actually be certified as New York hemp, so that it has sort of the cachet and perhaps could yield a higher price like Napa wine or Sonoma wine or something like that does.
Sure. So we know that there's a litany of these regulations and safety guidelines flying around. James, while we're on the topic, what happens when these guidelines and requirements change? What do you do?
Yeah, well, for one thing, you've got to have a good relationship. You've got to have the infrastructure to handle a fast-paced regulatory-based business like this. You've got to have the consumer regulatory affairs people in-house, and you've got to have a good relationship with your regulators. So, if a rule changes, a guideline changes, and it's something that is not so critical, maybe related to the amount of servings on a package or something like that, that rule changes, you've got to put that on your package, and you've got a bunch of packaging already printed with that. You can probably work with your regulator to use up that packaging. To the extent that something relates more to health and safety, a required laboratory testing, a QR code that leads right to that laboratory, or like I said, the milligram limits for CBD in New York. If that rule were to come into effect and you've got a bunch of 35 or 40 milligram CBD beverage products and the limit is 25, there's no way that the regulator is going to allow you to continue to sell those. So those are going to be, that's going to lead to a real problem with a write-off and a recall and pulling things from the market and destroying product.
Sure. Nurture those regulatory relationships first and foremost, it sounds like. Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Oh, you're on mute.
I am sorry. Thank you.
No
So the fact that this industry is changing so quickly is one of the really fun things about representing clients in the industry. So as James said, you need to be on your toes. You need to be ready to do things quickly and make changes quickly. And again, I would emphasize being really on good relationships with the regulators so that if things do change and you have a discussion with them as to how best to make that change. But as an example, when the Farm Act was passed in 2018, the Trademark Office changed its rules. Then they issued guidance as to what you could file and what you could protect. CBD with hemp with less than 0.3% THC in it. Under certain circumstances, they would allow you to file the registrations. So we discussed with our clients what they were doing. Could we file for the registrations and to act quickly so they'd be the first on the register? For example, not to give any secrets away, but I do have a notice to clients drafted on the hope that when the federal government does amend the Controlled Substances Act and allows cannabis to be legal, and we can file trademark registrations for cannabis. I have that ready to go with some minor amendments so we can go out and act quickly and get on the register as quickly as possible.
Excellent. So clearly having the right team and the right regulatory relationships are also part of this. And on that note, just looking at when regulatory guidelines and requirements are changing, Dan, what has been your experience? Is there anything you can tell us from the packaging end?
Sure. Please bring the window example slide up for me if you don't mind.
Certainly.
So you have to understand these regulatory boards, they're newly established. They lean on regulations from neighboring states or the members of their experience elsewhere. Often the rules in month one are not the same by month two. So here's an example. In Massachusetts, we had 50,000 child-resistant vape boxes on their way to a client. They had a beautiful clear window that showed the shiny vape cartridge inside. It was glistening with oil. We were really pumped about it. And then I get a call from my client that the regulatory board suddenly decided you're no longer allowed to show the contents until the actual package is open. So our client, along with other companies, often their competitors, they went in, they requested leniency, they expressed the fiscal loss that would incur from destroying the packaging, and they were amenable to that. They gave them a 6-month window to use up existing packaging and remove the window for future use. Other examples are hopefully not as drastic. James pointed out if milligrams change, if new language has to be added, you accomplish this with labels, cover-ups. It's not ideal, but with smart design, hopefully it could fit seamlessly into the existing package and end up being an ad instead of a detraction.
Thanks for the example. That was very well laid out. And I guess my thought would be here, Michael, what kind of legal and regulatory actions can you be exposed to if you get something like this wrong? I mean, where is the risk?
Well, there is quite a lot of risk. On the federal level, if you do things wrong, and for example, you start making unqualified health claims on your product for a CBD product, for example, you can get a warning letter from the FDA. Basically, the FDA says, we've looked at your packaging and we looked at your website. We think you're marketing your product as an unapproved drug, or you're making health claims. We need you to stop. You can also be subject to an enforcement action by the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission is the agency of the federal government that regulates basically truth in advertising, non-deceptive practices in advertising. And in December of 2020, the FTC announced their first regulatory actions and that they had settled with 6 companies who were making unqualified or inappropriate health claims on their products. The companies had fines from anywhere from $20,000 to $80,000. They had to stop making the claims, relabel, amend all their advertising or promotional materials, take product off the shelves, and promise the FTC that they wouldn't again in the future make these unqualified health claims. In addition to the government actions, you could also be subject to a private action by either a competitor under the Lanham Act, which is the Trademark Act, for false advertising. For example, if you're making a health claim or any claims and you can't substantiate it. And just recently I read, I think yesterday, a law firm filed some class action, basically saying to a number of companies, you're making claims that are not appropriate. You're telling people these products can cure diseases. You're wrong, they're buying them. And so we're going to put together a class of consumers and sue you for a tremendous amount of money. In addition, look, if you are subject to a recall, subject to government access, or being sued by a company on the basis that you're making false or misleading claims on your packaging or in your advertising, there's a huge reputational damage. So if you spent years building up a business and a brand, it's going to take a major hit if you become known as somebody who's not complying with the regulations. And in addition, there's also state actions and state regulators that can take actions as well.
Excellent. So it takes a lifetime to build and one bad mistake to break it. James, with your experience in this area as well, what are some of the things that you've seen from an exposure level?
Yeah, Michael's spot on with the focus. If the federal regulators have been they don't have the thousands of field agents that would be needed to go to every retailer in the United States that sells a CBD product and try to get them to pull the product. So they've been focused on health claims, dubious health claims. But in addition to that, I mentioned earlier that New York had among their labeling requirements to state this product was derived from hemp and may contain THC. There's a case that people in the industry are watching where a hazardous hazmat type truck driver, which is a sort of high-end trucking job, lost his job because he was a frequent user of a CBD product, and he tested in a drug test positive for too high of a THC content. He sued the CBD maker, alleging false and deceptive practices and other things, and also alleged racketeering RICO violations, which are treble damages charges. And that case is still ongoing, so that's very interesting. As Michael mentioned, too, the state regulators, in addition to the federal government, could be a problem in this area. We've had a beverage distribution client that was slapped with a cease and desist order for carrying a CBD beverage in New York because, as I said, the New York rules are not fully implemented yet. The proposed New York rules state that someone who violates the rules in a negligent fashion 3 times within a 5-year period will receive a 5-year ban from having any kind of CBD related license or selling or processing or distributing CBD related products. So that is a incredibly harsh penalty. If you think about it, it's not clear what a negligent violation would be, but it's clear that the regulators are taking this area very seriously.
Thank you very much for that. And now that we're all terrified, John, what actions, tools, technologies, what's available to help protect brand rights, protect really your company that you've built, and how do you position for success in a world of just unknowns?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of scary stuff we just chatted about. So you do definitely need to invest in a technology ecosystem, I like to say. And
Okay.
I mentioned a bunch of them before, right? You got to do the right thing around the COAs, the ERP systems, the seed to sale systems, and even invest in systems like ours, where you can actually put a physical tagger onto the product, test it at the critical nodes, and that points to origin, right? Where the origin was. Are you doing the right SOPs to be able to make sure you're doing it? Are you capturing the data at every point? So when these things come up, you have proof points that you did all the right things. It prevents you from counterfeits that are out there, diversion, inversion. All these things are happening.
Right.
People are ripping off your packaging because of a certain strain, and by using these type of technology, you can prove and have proof points of you are the originator of these certain products. And it's critical that we do these things. And coming back to the SOPs and protocols, you need to spend the time to make sure you're documenting these properly within an organization. And if you do that, as you bring in new people and you're expanding, people are doing things the correct way. And if you put that type of rigor in, and that's what I think it comes down to, you have to have discipline, rigor, and put the right processes, list all the regulatories, and team up with the right business-to-business partners that you need to do this. There's a lot of companies out there that want to work with you. Make sure they're the right companies, the right fit. And if you bring those all together, you'll be able to meet the needs of your company and then also meet ultimately the customer need.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And I know just even from the Titan side, with all the controlled substance and cannabis clients we work with, those SOPs, if you don't get those processes in place, you're set up to fail from the beginning.
Yes.
And I'd be curious, Michael, what are some of your thoughts from a legal standpoint in this area?
Well, the start off first is you need a great team of advisors behind you. And as I've told my clients a lot of times, also to listen to your advisors. So as we've spoken about before, the rules, the regulations, the laws are constantly changing on both the state level and hopefully the federal level as well. So when you're involved in the business, you have to be able to stay on your toes, stay up to date on the regulations, listen to your advisors. If they, we've had clients come to us with great marketing ideas where we've said, well, here is what we believe you can and cannot say, and make sure that you really listen to and take that to heart, because you don't want to be in a position where your product's being pulled off the market or you're getting sued by the FTC as well. And also to work with your scientists. If you do have studies or substantiations and you've put together books and records of what your product does and can't do, that will help significantly.
Excellent. So as we wrap this up, what are some best practices and some pearls of wisdom that you could share with our attendees that are watching and listening right now, starting with Michael.
Sure. So from a branding perspective, if you're starting a business and you're creating new brands, think of a distinctive brand. Think of a brand that you're going to be able to protect. Don't make it generic. We always have a balance between marketers who want to tell the consumer exactly what the product is by the brand name versus having to invest in a name that doesn't describe a product. You want to search, you want to hire somebody to look to see if the brand name you're adopting is already out there, if somebody's already using it, if you're going to be out in the market for a period of time. Start to get success and get a cease and desist letter from a guy like me saying you have to stop using that brand because you're infringing our mark is a huge hit. So you want to make sure you do that search and that you can use the brand. If possible, file to register in the state if you're selling a product that can't be registered on the federal trademark register. If commercially reasonable, use the product on a quote unquote legal good. So if it's commercially reasonable to sell chocolates that are not infused with cannabis, do that. Again, it has to be commercially reasonable, and we're always balancing budgets and desires. We always tell clients, if you had a wheelbarrow full of money, here's what I do, but with a limited budget, here's maybe what we can do to do it. Use state courts to enforce your rights if you have to, and plan for the future. Just be ready to move quickly as the laws continually change.
Great advice. John, what are your best practices that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, from a branding perspective, I always like to say, take a holistic look at your brand. Make sure you understand what your brand promise is. Make sure that brand promise is translating through your products. Make sure all the functional teams within your organization are on board with that brand promise. Build that infrastructure that I spoke about of technology and ecosystems and business partners. And then make sure you have a strategy around traceability, transparency, and trust.
The triple T's, don't forget them.
Don't forget them.
James, what are your pearls of wisdom you can share?
Yeah, so as we've mentioned a number of times, this is such a difficult area. There's a direct conflict between federal and in many cases state law, and there's some gray, there's some black, and there's some white. So first and foremost, be a good actor. Don't be a bad actor. Don't even think about making disease or health claims. We know the FDA takes the position this is not an approved drug. Then decide what you're selling. Is it a food and beverage? Is it a cosmetic? Or is it a dietary supplement? And then go find those rules under the federal regime, get some advisors to help you interpret those rules, and try to stick to those rules as closely as you can in terms of packaging and labeling. We know you're not going to hit it exactly. We know the FDA takes the position that you can't add CBD to these products, but you will look like the good actor in the space if you do everything you can. If you're, for instance, you have a beverage, if you're trying to comply with all the rules that other beverages have to comply with in terms of their packaging and labeling.
Excellent. So due diligence is definitely top of the list here. And Dan, bring us home. What can you tell us?
Okay, well, I'll reiterate, get familiar with your regulations and the regulators. They're people too. Build a relationship. The quicker you can get answers and approvals, the less headaches you'll have, and nothing will hold up your supply chain. Lean on the experts for advice and direction. Don't freak out when something inevitably changes. Just be prepared to pivot when it does.
Excellent. Very well done, gentlemen. I have to say this has been so informative for myself, and I'm sure for everyone involved. And at this time, we can move into open Q&A. I don't see any questions that have been put into the feature on Zoom. So does anyone have a question? We will now unmute the microphones if anyone would like to speak with our panelists. And if there's no open questions, I have one I'd like to ask. What are some of the regulatory woes that keep you up at night? You're all very well-established professionals. What are some of the things that you worry about? Open question.
Go ahead, Dan.
Dan?
Yeah, sure. So, we deal with something, we produce a package overseas, and we deal with Chinese New Year in that instance. And, our clients trying to go to market for 420. And, we're a bit jumping the gun and trying to get things into production, made and shipped, while also balancing an official approval from the regulators. So I spent a couple of weeks up at night hoping that those paths kind of crossed each other, and we got the thumbs up because the production cycle did start and it was sitting on the line ready to go. And the second we got that thumbs up, we greenlighted the production and we're good to go. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but in that instance it did. So That's one of them.
That's great. And real quick, I just want to mention, apparently we cannot unmute everyone. So if you want to ask a question, you still do have to use the Q&A feature. You can also, I believe, raise your hand. So we'll just keep a lookout for those. What are some of your regulatory woes, James, that keep you up?
Yeah, I guess it's the unknown. It's the changing nature of regulation. As I said, New York was sort of dormant on allowing CBD products to be used and sold, and then one day all of a sudden you heard that they were sort of banned in New York City. And as I said, we had a client that received a cease and desist on distributing a CBD related beverage. So it's just, you don't really know when you're going to go from sort of benign neglect to suddenly a regulator being local or being federal decides that they want to take an active role in policing the industry.
Very interesting. And out of curiosity, in terms of New York as a state, where do you feel that New York fits in terms of all the other states that, from a regulatory standpoint, are really cracking down? Are they difficult? Are they a little bit more lenient? What would you say?
Yeah, I've had the good fortune to meet and spend a decent amount of time from over the last couple of years with the primary regulators of the Department of Health in New York, people from the ag department, and I will tell you that my impression of them is that they are genuine, forthright people who are friends of the cannabis industry and would like to see a well-regulated, well-intentioned, thriving cannabis business, be it on the marijuana side. Right now, it's obviously only medical. Hopefully, later in the year will be adult use, or on the CBD side. And I don't think that they're in any way antagonistic toward the industry. They simply want to do it what they view as doing it right and doing it with regulations that make sense and don't do anything that takes any chances with health or public safety.
Thank you very much. And we
Yeah,
have a question that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'd just like to add to that. I spent a lot of time up in Albany as well with the senators, assembly people, and the folks running the program up there. And they are doing a great job of listening and putting, taking best practices from other states that have been out there doing this for a while. And there's a lot of, like I think we mentioned before, a lot of spinning plates going on. So they're managing all that, and they're doing a very good job of it. So from a New York standpoint, I think they're gonna roll out a nice program. My wife's actually in the medical program right now, and going to the dispensaries. It's very smooth. They took, when we first got involved, when she got involved, they spoke to it, explained to her how it was going to work. And when COVID hit, they were able to do home delivery. So it was great. They were talking about pivoting. Dan talked about pivoting, and they did a very good job of pivoting when all this was happening.
Excellent. And we had a question that just came in from Anne Marie Austin, who's asking, is white labeling for CBD a good idea to start your brand in Florida? Whoever wants to take that.
I actually don't know the regulations in Florida, so I'm gonna pass on that one.
Sure.
But I guess from a white labeling standpoint, you could work with a contract manufacturer. You don't have to put all the investment in right away. So I'm sure Dan can add to that as well. You come in, work with a contract manufacturer. They're going to work with your formulation to what product, and then you work with experts like Dan to make sure that the packaging is. That's not a bad start to get into the industry before you put in the investment into your own facilities.
Great advice. Dan?
Yeah. I suppose if you have, maybe some other outlets as well, and then it's just a matter of how much product you've sold in Florida. It's a little bit less risky, the white labeling approach. So,
Sure.
potentially.
Thank you. And we have another question here from Judy Moon. She said, I joined a bit late, so apologies if you've already covered this, but is it legal for product information to be delivered digitally versus being printed on the packaging? For example, province information, and that's totally up Dan's alley.
Yeah, that depends on a state basis.
Okay.
There's some states you'll find, one sentence on the back and a big QR code, and there's other states where we have a 3-page booklet of regulations and test results and so on. So really just state by state basis.
Excellent. How about our legal guys over there, Michael and James? Anything from a legal standpoint you would want to add?
No, I think Dan covered it. Look, the answer is this is a state by state product. And so whether or not a digital information or printed information on the package is required is wholly dependent upon what the regulations in your individual state say.
Excellent. Any other questions? We have about 12 minutes left. So anything, panelists, that you want to add that maybe we didn't get into during the core discussion?
I think one thing is around consumer knowledge, right? There's a lot of folks that come up to me saying, "Hey, John, you've been working in the industry for the last 3 to 4 years. What's the best CBD products I should use?" So I think there's an area for all of us in the industry to make sure that we're educating the new consumers coming into the marketplace. And I think all brands need to take that on as an ambassador to be able to do that. And I think we all have a responsibility to be able to put that information out there and help people get there, because people want to use it for wellness and pain management. And I see this firsthand with my wife I was talking about earlier. So the more knowledge that can be put out there and discussions about this and take the stigma away. And I think the stigma is going away, right? There all these surveys that are out in the marketplace that 70% of the people are open to cannabis being a legal entity out there and an alternative to other products. So I think knowledge is a big area that we need to pay attention to.
I couldn't agree more. And we have another follow-up question from Judy Moon, who said, any thoughts around how you see platforms playing a role as a distribution channel?
Does she have a specific platform, or just, and when she says platforms, are you talking about technology platform or logistics transportation platforms?
Judy, if you could clarify what you're referring to. Oh, she said tech platforms.
Yeah, tech platform. Yeah, it's a critical that you because a lot of at the state levels, depending on the seed to sale systems, they're requiring where you are in the supply chain. But you have to also look at your ERP systems and the lab information systems and the partners, because you might not have all the lab information, but you might partner with a third-party lab, and you want to make sure you're dealing with a reputable lab also. But also, I was talking about earlier, capturing that information in a system that you can point to later on if it comes up. That you have all the right information, and back, Kelly, to the SOPs, right? And
Right,
are you
exactly.
doing the right SOPs, the right protocols, are the people doing all that? So yeah, spend the time investigating on what systems meet your requirements. And then there's plenty of advisors out there. And I think James and Michael was saying, trust your advisors and go out there and get the help. There's a lot of expertise out in the marketplace. So just reach out to these folks and they'll help you through these things.
Great advice. And a follow-up question from Anne Marie Austin. She asks, can our brand be a catering company providing CBD to its consumers?
I'll take that, Kelly. So the answer in my mind is it depends, right? Like a lot of things, it depends on where you are, what state we're talking about. But for instance, in New York, under the proposed regs, there is a permit needed to be a distributor of CBD that is grown from hemp out of state. But there is not a permit needed to be a distributor of CBD that is grown from hemp in New York State. However, there is a $300 license application fee and a license needed, which is more rigorous than a permit, to be a retailer of CBD products. I would have to believe, since you are passing along the product to people at an event, for instance, that you would probably be viewed by the New York regulators as a retailer and therefore would need a retail license to do so. I'm not quite sure how they would feel about that, because among the retail license provisions, there's things about, signage about CBD products and THC and things like that. So it's possible that you could work with the regulator to get there and get a retail license for that. I think that would be worth pursuing, and best of luck to you on that. But it's possible.
Right. Interesting. And she also added, we see a lot of people doing dinners infused with CBD on the internet. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd have to actually see what they're actually doing and how they're doing it. And look, this is a little bit of a very, I don't want to say, well, Wild West area. So there are people pushing the envelope. So I don't know where they're doing the dinners, what states they're doing it in, and whether it would be legal, for example, eventually in New York, or whether it's legal in Colorado, but we'd have to look at the particular state that they're supplying their services in to see whether or not it would comply.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you, panelists, all of you, for offering your time and your insights into this topic, which has definitely left a lot of people scratching their heads. So at this time, we're just about wrapping up here. If anyone has an additional question, or if you'd like to contact one of the panelists, the information's on the screen here, please feel free to reach out. And also, if you haven't already, please check out the CHNA New York website, connect with us on LinkedIn, and make sure, stay connected. Don't be afraid to ask. That's what we're here for. So on that note, we are concluding today's event on the importance of cannabis packaging and labeling. Thank you again for everyone who's joined us, and we really hope to see you all next time. Have a great afternoon.